I'm Kyle Harms. I'm a senior lecturer in information science and also an MTEI teaching fellow.
And I'm Erik Eshelman. I'm the university engineer, and I also am an instructor in civil and environmental engineering.
And we're here today to talk about how generative AI may impact or support learning in your courses. So a lot of us have heard a lot about generative AI, and we're probably wondering what it is and how it's going to impact our classrooms. So Erik, what's your experience with generative AI?
Well, not very much. I am interested in exploring how I could use this in our course and also understanding how students are going to be using generative AI. So kind of on both sides, how I can use it for instruction and then also how I can understand or adapt to how students are using this.
So have you used it before by chance?
No.
Okay, so I think what we're going to want to do here then is we're going to first want to just generally talk about what is generative AI. What does it mean to be able to use this? And I'm going to go through a few examples to help you see how this might be used in a class by your students or even by yourself. And then let's follow up with like a discussion brainstorming different ideas about how we might be able to utilize this, this technology to further our learning goals in our courses.
Sounds great.
So let's first talk about what generative AI is. Kavita Bala, the Dean of Computing and Information Science, described it in a word that I really like. And she describes generative AI as basically a token predictor. And so what this kind of means to me is sort of think about a token as a word, right? So if you've got a sentence, there are lots of different words inside of that sentence. There are lots of different tokens. So if I were to say something like Cornell University is, how would you finish that sentence?
A great university.
A great university, right? And I might have said something like Cornell University is in Ithaca, New York, right? There are multiple different ways to finish out this sentence. So what generative AI is doing is it's trying to say, given these tokens that I've seen previously, what is the probability that this is going to be the next word? But let's actually try to check out an example here and see what an example of generative AI like ChatGPT would actually say. So I'm going to just simply say to this generative AI, please complete this sentence. Cornell University is. And let's see what it has to say. Cornell University is a prestigious Ivy League institution renowned for its academic excellence, cutting-edge research, and commitment to fostering a diverse and inclusive learning environment. And so what's happened here is that there's this really, really large language model with a bunch of different words. It's multi-dimensional. And when it's trying to give us a response, it's trying to predict what it thinks the next word's going to be, and it picked this particular sentence. And the thing to keep in mind too when it's doing it is that it isn't always going to be the same. So there's an amount of randomness that if we ask it this on my computer, but you go and ask it on yours, it's going to give you a slightly different answer.
Well, thank you for explaining all of that. I feel like this is a great opportunity for students to have a new way of learning, a new way of experiencing courses. I don't know necessarily where to start as an instructor. So could you walk me through how I would get started using generative AI as part of my course planning, and also how I would allow students to use generative AI through assignments?
Sure. So let's first start with just a basic example of what like a student might do if they were trying to use this to complete their homework. And then we'll use that as an example to sort of build out how we might be able to use this in our courses for those schools that I had talked about previously. So let's go ahead now. We're going to use ChatGPT for this. I'm going to create a new chat. And so one of the things that I have in my course is I have a project where I ask the students to create basically an image gallery written on a web page. And so if you're a student, you're saying, oh my goodness, like this is really, really hard. Why don't I just have, generative AI do this assignment for me? So I'm just going to simply take the URL for this website and I'm going to say, oh, I'm a student. I just need this homework done. And I'm just going to simply ask it to do it for me. Write the code for my homework. And then I'll paste it in and see what it has to say. And it'll say that it can't do that because it says, I can't go off and look at this other page. Now I did this on purpose because what I want you to see here is that this is all really, really new technology. It's just coming out. We aren't quite sure how we use it all. And every single month, year, whatever, it's constantly changing. There are now versions of this tool that can in fact follow that website and then actually read it. But the version that we're not isn't there. So this video isn't static. What you're seeing here is true today, but things are going to keep changing and improving as time goes on. So now that we know that it can't actually just read the assignment and do it for us, I'm going to basically try to summarize down what the assignment is, and I'm going to ask it to do it for me. So I'm going to say, write the code for a PHP image gallery website, because the assignment requires that they write their code in PHP, and let's see what it does. And so notice right here, it says, no problem. I'm going to go ahead and tell you what's going to happen here. It's first telling us that it's got to create some files. It's now writing the code for the main homepage of the website. And so we're starting to see that it's putting a bunch of stuff together to piece this out. And then it's also got a second page that it's putting together here that when you click on one of those thumbnails on that main page, it'll take you to that page so you can see a larger version of that image itself. But one of the things that you have to be mindful of when you're using generative AI is that it can't read your mind. That seems kind of silly, but the thing is in my assignment, for example, this had to be backed by a database. You couldn't just statically code this whole thing. And so what that basically means is I want to have a separate data store where I store all of the information about this image gallery that I have, and then I want to load that into the website that's being produced. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so basically now what I'm going to say to this thing, well, this looks great. Thank you for writing this whole thing, but you didn't actually fulfill the requirements of the assignment. So what I want you to gather out of this is that when you're using these tools, part of using it is to have it refine your answer. So it's not just good enough to say, solve this for me, but you have to look over it and look at it as a critical eye. I think you're starting to see now that there's a real learning opportunity here. So if you're trying to get students to understand and evaluate solutions, right? Critically evaluating their own work, the work of others, that's a skill that we see across disciplines, whether that's writing, whether that's some sort of an engineering or a mathematics problem. You need to be able to look at it with a critical eye and to evaluate whether it's correct. And so if we start to look through this particular piece, you're like, well, yeah, you've done a lot of good things. I see that you've got the main pages, you've got some images, you've got some styling information for the web page, but you've missed this really important piece. And now that I've looked over this and reviewed it, now I know that I need to tell it to change something different. So this might be a reflection activity that you could do during class, right? So if you're doing some sort of active learning activity where you tell the whole class, ask it to do this thing, this prompt. The students are going to get slightly different answers, which is really great. And then now you can have them pair up to then be able to, for example, discuss and reflect the strengths and the differences or the weaknesses in the different solutions that had shown up. The idea is yes, this can do your homework, but the reality is that we can use this to help pull out other pieces that we've wanted our students to learn, but we haven't yet been successfully doing it inside of our classes. And so I feel like this is a real opportunity rather than, oh my gosh, we're just going to have lots of cheating in our courses.
It seems like there's a lot of opportunity to incorporate this. I just would need to understand this is specific to coding a website. So how do I take it from this to maybe creating like a project schedule or doing something that is beyond kind of web programming?
Oh, this is really great. So ChatGPT, the information that is inside of it, these generative AI models have information from all different disciplines. And so in that way, it means that just because I've given you an example here on programming, you may feel that this doesn't apply to your course. But the reality is the general principles do. So what's an example of an assignment that you would do in your course? Let's try to ask it to do that for us. And then we'll think about the opportunities that exist within there.
Well, I'll use the example of creating a project schedule. So we provide the students with the drawings, the construction drawings for the building, and then we ask them to break that down into unique pieces of work and then develop a project schedule based on the aspects of work that go into completing that building.
So produce a project schedule to construct a building and see what it gives us, right? All right, we've got to define the scope and the objectives. We got to have a schedule for preparing the site, the foundation and the structure, building envelope, exterior finalization, and then we've got our post-construction stuff. Now, I think this is a good point to point this out. One of the things that we can look at from a tool like this, it can be kind of mesmerizing, like, oh my gosh, it just gave me all of this, right? It feels really, really authoritative in the way that it presents it, and it feels like I can trust it. One of the things that I need you to know if you're going to use something like this in your class, that these generative AI models are simply token predictors. We talked about that earlier. They predict the next word. That then means that they lie. It doesn't know the truth. It just simply predicts the next thing. So it's possible that when you go through this, you may say, it looks like this is generally right, but there's some parts of this that are completely wrong. That's a learning opportunity right here. So this might have just been simply an exercise that you could have done right in your classroom. Everyone pull up your laptops, open up the generative AI tool, and ask it to produce a project schedule. And I want you to evaluate how feasible that this schedule is, what it's missing, and what's wrong with it. Because remember, if this tool is lying 50% of the time, then we need to make sure that we're helping them learn that critical evaluation of the discipline as part of those learning goals.
Yeah.
So Erik, are there any things in here that look like they're not quite right? Like this isn't quite what you wanted your students to do?
Well, I think the phases that are outlined look generally accurate, although it made assumptions based on the materials that were used for this particular building. So phase 3 says poor foundation footings, so that implies that it's assuming it's a concrete foundation. What if it's not? How would we make that adjustment? Or how would we inform the generative AI tool about the type of building that it is developing a schedule for?
Oh, I love that. So you're already seeing that like it made these assumptions, and that's a real problem if you're trying to actually build a building. So it sounds like we need to have them fix this. So maybe as part of your activity, you ask them to revise this. So like what might we ask it to fix?
Well, could we tell the tool that this is a wood-framed building? Please revise the project schedule.
Certainly. Let's see what it does. Oh, look at that. Lace subfloor framing. So it did update it based on it.
It took steel. Originally, during, I think, phase 4 or 5, it was using steel construction. So it did change the material type.
And so even though I didn't really know anything, I've not taken your class, in some ways, you've used me as a student as part of one of your exercises or your activities to help really pull out this point about how important it is to sort of really take a critical eye and make sure that like the specifications for the building and what's required to do it align with what's required for the schedule itself.
Yeah. Is there a way to take this information and have it produce a graphical interface? So if we wanted the generative AI tool to produce a Gantt chart of this particular schedule, or outline a Gantt chart that's a graphic representation of the schedule, would we be able to do that?
So the technology is always changing, it's always improving. A lot of generative AI can create images, it can create code, it can often create charts. There's one way to find out, so I say we just ask it. I think we'll tell it that we're happy with it. We'll say, great,
Okay.
please produce a Gantt chart. Did I spell that right?
Yep.
Chart of this schedule. Oh, it's telling us it can't do it.
Well, we found a limitation.
Well, that's an opportunity, right? That's a place where if we're concerned about academic integrity, it's not just like, the students can feed their homework into this and it can give them the answer. So this is a place where there's a bit of a hole in what the tool can do. And so that I also see that as, for the time being, as a place where you then might be able to really pull out something much more deeper in your class by actually having them produce that chart based on the revisions, the critiquing, the reflection that you've already had them do inside of the tool.
Well, this is really interesting, and I can see how students could use this to initiate a project and add content to an example of our final project. I still want to make sure that students are completing their own work and that they are responsible for the assignments that they're handing in. So how do I, as an instructor, make sure that the work that is being turned in is their work and it's not just generated from AI?
That's a really good question, and it's kind of the answer is open-ended. The short of the answer is we don't currently know. This is also new, Educators who are trying to work in this space are still trying to figure out how we should be handling this moving forward, because this feels like a very disruptive technology to the way that we've been teaching and educating students for so long. And so there are a couple ways to think about it. The way that I like to think about it like this is that, if we know what the tool can do right now and what the tool isn't so good at doing, then those are the real opportunities where that's where you really want to really focus those parts of your assignment in those particular areas. Because they're going to have to understand the generated pieces to complete those other holes that it doesn't do so well, right? Mm-hmm. They have to understand your schedule well enough to know how to then be able to produce that Gantt chart, for example. Mm-hmm. And so the real opportunity here now is to understand where those limitations are, but understand that those limitations will likely go away over time. Generative AI is getting better and better by the day, by the month, by the year. And so over time, this will not necessarily be true. But for now, that's where we are, and that's what I feel that educators are essentially going to have to do for the time being. Mm-hmm. The other thing to keep in mind is you may just simply say, well, I'm just going to tell them that they have to do it. They aren't allowed to use generative AI. They can't use ChatGPT to complete their assignment. And then I'm just going to simply run it through a plagiarism checker or a generative AI checker to make sure that they wrote the code themselves. And what I need you to know is that, in fact, that is simply not the case. You cannot use these tools. They cannot predict what was generated by AI, and they cannot tell you with any sort of accuracy whether or not AI did this or somebody else did this on their own. They're not intelligent tools, they don't know. So any sort of generative AI detector is going to lead to false positives. And when it comes to academic integrity, that's a serious problem. You don't want to bring a student up on a charge for something that they in fact wrote just because some generative AI tool said that they didn't write it.
Yeah, that is a challenge. So it sounds like finding a way to incorporate generative AI into your course and make it part of the learning experience versus exclude it and then try to police the use of generative AI.
Well, that's my perspective on it. Other instructors don't quite feel that way, but what I will say is regardless of your approach that you're taking to using generative AI in your classroom, one of the things that I think that we can always lean back on is asking students to show their work. Mm-hmm. These tools can sometimes do that, but remember, they're token predictors. So that then means that the work that they're showing you isn't necessarily going to add up to the final solution. And so that then gives you a place as an instructor to say, look, I want you to do this, but you have to show me all of your work. You have to show me your initial drafts, right? You have to show me how you arrived at this solution. And so part of that may be, little pieces of reflection that you have in the different phases of your assignment. So for milestone 1, where they had to create the initial schedule, they need to write a paragraph explaining how they went about this and the things that they were concerned about, because if they had, generative AI do this, they're not necessarily going to be concerned about anything. It just completed it out. Yeah. So one thought there is to really think about the different ways that you can get them to communicate with more detail how they arrived at that solution.
Yeah.
So Erik, we've gone through a lot today. It probably feels a little bit overwhelming. You're probably not quite sure necessarily what you're going to do next. But tell me, how are you feeling about generative AI in your classrooms? And are there open questions that you still feel like you might need to know to be able to do something with this upcoming semester?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you walking me through kind of how you interact with generative AI. And I think my big takeaway from this experience or this session is that I don't need to be intimidated. It's okay to, in an iterative way, ask questions, type them out, and then respond to the information that generative AI is producing. So I think that it's not as much of a unknown at this point, but I probably just need to spend a little bit of time experimenting with some of the aspects of the course and what may be an appropriate way to integrate generative AI into some of the assignments and maybe into some of the class activities. So I appreciate you walking me through this. Thank you.
That's awesome. And so the thing is since this is all so new, you're going to try things in your classroom. Some of those things with generative AI are going to work really well, and some aren't. But as a community of educators, we need to share those things so that we all figure out how we can start using this to its maximum potential in our classrooms. Because the truth is nobody knows how to do this yet. Yeah. And so we're part of that journey together.
Yeah, great. Thank you.